Hey, what is going on guys, RvzStealth here, and in today's video we're going to be taking a look at 8 different tips that are new to Season 10 that you should be aware of before you do head into Ranked. Unranked to Diamond series will be continuing over on my stream on Twitch as this video goes live too guys, so if you want to check that out, there is going to be a link down in the description below. So let's just jump right into it now, and the first thing we're going to go over here is the new Alcoves. So there's a lot of different things you can look to do with the new Alcoves. Obviously, they're not going to come into effect every single game, but it's still good to know a bunch of different things you can do with them if this situation does arise. Alright, so the first one here is that if you are playing a champion who does have a gap closer, and for example, say you're getting ganked by the enemy jungler and you're not going to be able to escape by walking back to your tower, you can walk into the alcove and you can look to juke the enemy champion around the alcove. So what you can do is you can go behind it. When the enemy champion comes behind it with you, you can use your gap closer over the wall and look to escape like that. So certain champions who do have gap closers, you can look to use it to kite out certain situations and to get out of situations that you wouldn't have been able to in previous patches. Now there's a couple different champions that can look to utilize the alcove terrain. So champions like Bard, Zoe, Kiana can look to capitalize on the alcove. So I think Bard is going to be the one champion especially that can really look to benefit from these, because what you can do with Bard is if you are getting ganked, you can look to dip into the alcove and then you can actually use your E from behind the alcove there and you can use it towards your tower. So you can look to make a pretty easy escape there if you are getting ganked, and if you're not able to like get to the wall beside the tri-bush there, if you're not able to get over there and use your E to escape, you can dip into the alcove and then use your E to escape back to your tower. You also have the Zoe bubble interaction as well. Obviously, if the Zoe bubble goes through walls, it's going to increase the range on that. So it's not going to come into effect a ton when you're playing Zoe, because you're probably not going to be playing Zoe down in the bot lane or in the top lane. But if you are playing like Zoe support or something, or if you just end up having a skirmish down in the bot lane or in the top lane, then you can end up looking to utilize that with Zoe. Now, if you are playing a support who does run Hex Flash and you do end up getting ahead in the laning phase and you can play super aggro, you can sneak in behind the alcoves with somebody like a Blitz, a Thresh, a Leona, use your Hex Flash over the alcove into the bush, and then you can just look to surprise the opponent, jump on them, get a really good engage off, and they're not going to expect that a lot of the time, so you can find some pretty good engages there by utilizing that Hex Flash trick. The alcoves do open up for some pretty interesting gank routes as well for junglers. If the lane is pushed about halfway or a little bit more towards the enemy's side, you can look to sneak in behind the alcove, go into the bush, sneak in behind the alcove, and then tell your team to let the enemy team push into you. Once they push about halfway or a little bit more than halfway, you just sneak out from behind the alcove. The enemy team is not going to expect it at all, and you can find yourself getting some really successful ganks off by doing this. If the enemy jungler is ganking you and he's completely blocked off your path back to your tower and he's zoning you out, then you can look to use the alcoves to stall a little bit of time. If you notice that your jungler is in the vicinity and he's coming towards bot lane or coming towards top lane, then just look to dip into the alcoves, stall a little bit of time. That little bit of extra time that you can stall there in the alcoves could be enough for your jungler to come in and turn a 3v3 or turn a 2v2 situation. You can use the alcoves in certain situations as well to look to kite out melee champions if you are playing a ranged champion. So what you can do is you can just place a ward in the bush in front of the alcove there. You can dip in behind the alcove, and if the enemy is sitting in the bush trying to get towards you, you can continue auto attacking them, but they're not going to be able to hit you at all. So if you do end up falling into a sticky situation to where you're trying to escape a melee champion, then just you can dip in behind the alcove there and it can do a really good job at allowing you to kite out that melee champion. If you're playing somebody like Teemo or Shaco, you can also look to set up a trap in the alcove entrances there, so that if you do end up getting ganked and the enemy tries to follow you into the alcoves, you can do a really good job at kiting them out. And if you're playing like Teemo top lane, you can actually look to win a lot of 1v2 scenarios if you do utilize those alcoves with your shrooms. Alright, so for the next tip here, it's going to do with dragon influence in Season 10. So dragons are even more important to take, and it's even more important to keep priority on them throughout the early game with the new dragon souls, with the new dragons being really strong in preseason, and with them being a lot easier to take. A lot of junglers are going to be looking to take them pretty early on in the game, so it's really important that mid laners and bot laners are paying attention to what their jungler is looking to do. If your jungler is looking to take dragon and he's calling you over, get priority in lane or try to get priority in lane and try to come over there and help him. I've already seen so many times throughout the preseason so far to where the jungler's on Dragon, he's calling his team over, his team has the ability to move, but they just don't move. The enemy team ends up moving first, and then the team just loses the Dragon, the jungler starts flaming his bot lane or his mid lane, and the game is just a catastrophe from that point on. So always be paying attention to what your jungler's looking to do and play off of your jungler. With the new Dragon's impact in the preseason, the way the meta has been shaping out is that if you can play a strong early game skirmish jungler, or just a jungler who can do a great job at controlling objectives like Warwick, Nunu, Udyr, Lee Sin, like pretty much any early game skirmishing jungler, if you can play them well, then you're gonna have really good success on them. Also for mid lane and for bot lane, if you can play a champion who can get a push in the early game, who can get priority in most of their matchups, then you're also gonna find yourself having a lot more success on those types of champions. Now, if we take a look at which dragons are the best right now for Season 10, statistically speaking, Ocean Dragon is performing the best, followed by Mountain, then Infernal, and then in last place is Cloud. Now, even though Cloud statistically does perform the worst, it's not going to be the worst for every single game. I think the reason to why Cloud is performing the worst right now is just because not every single game you're going to have a team composition to where you're really going to be able to utilize that extra CDR on your ultimate. If you got a team composition with somebody, say like Nidalee or Elise or Jace or Udyr, then the Cloud Dragon is pretty useless for the most part. If you do have a team comp though that consists of something like Rumble and Malphite, then picking up those early Cloud Dragons is going to be a lot more impactful. The Ocean Dragon regen there is just going to help you out no matter which champions you play, no matter what team composition you have, so I think that's the main reason as to why it's performing better. Same with Mountain there, it's performing very well because the extra resist you get from it are going to be very useful for your team. Infernal Dragon, with that getting nerfed in Season 10, it's no longer like the best dragon to pick up. If you end up having to give up an early Infernal Dragon over to the enemy team, it's not the end of the world. It's not going to be as bad as in Season 9. So moving on to our next tip here, with Ketchup XP being removed in Season 10, it makes it so that going for early game invades, if you're playing an aggressive early game jungler, is a lot more rewarding, and it's something that you should actively be looking to do if you're playing that aggressive early game jungler into a much weaker early game jungler. A perfectly viable path for Season 10, and one that can work pretty much every single game, especially for the lower elos, is you can just look to take your buff and then path immediately into the enemy's jungle and take their buff. Now, what you can look to do to make sure this can work every single game is just get an early ward down on the enemy's buff, so it doesn't really matter. Get a ward down on their red buff or their blue buff so you know where the enemy jungler is starting, and the buff that they don't end up starting, that is the one that you can look to invade and either take it, or you can also look to wait for the enemy jungler to arrive, look to duel them and then kill them, also take their buff, take another camp from them. So if you can utilize invades in the early game when you're playing strong early game junglers, you're going to pretty much make the enemy jungler useless and you can completely take over games. And then with the way the jungle XP has been changed in Season 10, every single jungler in the game does have the ability to level 3 gank you at around 2 minutes and 30 seconds into the game, so you do have to be aware of this and you do need to play accordingly. You're going to see this path most often on junglers who are better at taking single target camps. The clear that you can look to do to hit the level 3 and gank super early is you can take your buff, do Gromp, take your other buff, and then look to gank. So you're going to see this path most often on junglers like Kha'Zix, Warwick, Lee Sin, any early game focused jungler who's much better at taking single target camps than AoE camps. So you just got to look to expect this gank earlier on in the game and you got to ward accordingly. So what I'd be looking to do if you're playing bot lane or if you're playing top lane, just look to get a ward further down in the river at around 2 minutes and 10 seconds into the game, even a little bit earlier than that if you want to. You can place a ward down like as you enter lane after you end up leeching for your jungler, and that's going to be fine as well. But if you are playing a champion who's pushing up in lane, super important that you are warding so you don't end up dying early on and just throwing your early game advantage. Now, I don't want this video to be about Jungle Pass for Season 10 because I already did make a separate video on that. I made a video on the 7 best jungle routes that pro players are using right now in Season 10. So if you do want to go more in depth with that, if you want to take a look at that video, then I will leave an annotation on the right-hand corner of the screen. So next up here, let's talk about Baron and Dragon priority for Season 10. So in Season 9, a lot of the time, or at least most of the time, you would be looking to prioritize Baron over Dragon. If you did have to choose whether you prioritize one or the other, then Baron would pretty much be the one you'd be looking to prioritize every single time. But in this season now, with Dragon Souls being very strong, with the new Elder Dragon being very strong, you do want to still be controlling Dragon and not just giving up free dragons to the enemy team, even if you can get a Baron. So if you do get ahead in the early game, then try to have control of both objectives. Don't just be giving up free dragons. I know that in Season 9, like if there was a Cloud Dragon up or something, you wouldn't really care about just giving that up to the enemy team if you could take the Baron, but you don't really want to be giving up dragons this season, especially if the enemy team already has a couple, because even if you get the Baron, if they get a couple dragons, they get the Dragon Soul, and they get the Elder Dragon, then that can be very strong, and the Baron is not going to be worth it if the enemy team does get a bunch of those dragons. Now, if your team does end up falling behind in the mid to late game and you're just not able to contest for Baron, you're not able to get any control over that, then if there's a dragon spawning, it's going to be perfectly fine for you to look to just trade that Baron for the dragon, especially if you already got a couple dragons, because if you can get those stacking, if you can get the soul, then trading a Baron for a dragon soul especially is going to be more worth it a lot of the time. Now, later on in the game, if you're forced with the decision of whether or not you control Baron or Dragon, if you can only control one and you're playing a poke composition, I would be looking to control Elder instead of Baron. The reason for this is because the execute damage on Elder is very strong. Elder Dragon lasts exactly the same amount of time now as the Baron buff, so it's not like the enemy team can just take Baron, wait out your Elder, and then look to pressure after that. They last exactly the same amount of time, so if you're playing a comp that has somebody like an Ezreal as an AD carry, if you got a Xerath in the mid lane, then prioritizing that Elder is going to be really good for you. You can look to grab that Elder, group with your team, siege down a tower, let the Xerath just poke away, and if he can get multiple Qs off, use his ultimate, it's going to be very easy for him to take out targets with that execute damage and that extra burn damage coming out of Elder. Now, for the new brush that has been added over by Blue Buff on both sides of the map, you should be looking to utilize this in a bunch of different situations. So for example, if you're looking to control Baron or control Dragon, then you can look to sit in this bush, plant a ward on the other side of the wall there, and then if the enemy team does look to try to face check into you, you can use that bush to surprise them with a hook or with a pick. You can also just sit in that bush and zone the opponents from the objective. So if you're playing a champion who does not have really any damage that they can add to burn down the Dragon or the Baron, then just sit in the bush there, playing a support champion who's got good crowd control, zone the enemy jungler off of that objective, and allow your team to very easily take it. This can also be a great new pink ward spot if you've already got a pink ward in the pit of the objective you're taking. If you already got a pink ward in the pixel bush, then planting one here is also going to be a great spot now to just totally get full control of the objective you're looking to take. You can also look to utilize this if you do want to go for a very cheesy invade play in the early game. So you can just go for a standard invade play to where you just sit in the bush, wait for an enemy champion to walk over towards you, and then you can just look to pick them off. You can also look to just go for a 3-man invade and just wait for the enemy team to start up their buff. So if you're playing a very good skirmishing team in the early game, then you can just ward over the wall, sit in that bush, wait for the enemy team to start up the blue buff, and then just go in there and then just look to fight them and take the blue buff from them. That's a viable strategy as well right now for this patch, so you can definitely be looking to utilize this bush in a bunch of different ways. And then for number 8, let's take a look at some early game warding patterns you should be looking to use for Season 10. So for junglers, what you want to do and what most pro players and high elo junglers are doing in this patch is they're just getting a ward on the entrance to the side of the jungle that they won't be starting. So at around 30 seconds to 50 seconds into the game, they place a ward near the entrance to their red buff, for example. They base and they grab a sweeper. So you want to base, grab a sweeper there, head over to your other side of your map, take your other buff, And this is just really important for Season 10 especially. A lot of junglers in higher elos were using this in previous patches and in Season 9, but it's even more important here because you can just see if the enemy jungler is looking to invade you in the early game, and if they do, it's going to be very important for you to head over to their buff so that you don't end up falling behind. And then as for laners, I did touch on this a little bit earlier, but because junglers can now gank at around 230 or 240 into the game, you do want to make sure you are warding at the very latest 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And if the enemy jungler is playing a level 2 ganking jungler like a Camille, Xin Zhao, Jarvan, you want to be warding immediately, like before you get to lane, just to make sure you don't end up dying to a level 2 gank. Now where you want to ward is pretty important. You don't want to be warding in the tri-bush, because if you ward in the tri-bush, if you're playing top lane or bot lane and the enemy jungler comes through the river, you're not going to be able to see them at all. So you also don't want to just ward in the river bush, because if you ward there and they come through tri-bush, you're also not going to have as much time to react. So you kind of want to ward in between the river bush and in between the tri-bush. I'll have an example in the background gameplay there, and that's where you want to be warding so you get adequate vision of the jungler if he's coming from both directions. And then for mid laners, getting a ward on either the enemy's raptor camp before you get to lane or getting a ward at the entrance to the river there are two good ward spots for mid laners. Now depending on whether or not the enemy does have a level 2 ganking jungler, you don't need to place your ward before you get to lane. Like you can, if you do have push priority in your matchup, you can push in a wave or two, then you can go and plant your ward like at the entrance to the river there, and this will just allow yourself to have your ward up for a longer duration. So that is going to be it, guys. Hopefully you did enjoy this video. Hopefully you did find it helpful. If you did, then be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you have yet to already. So thanks for watching. Have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.